Ani, Bazu, Nagani, Anishinaabe, Stace Laforme, Disnakas, Credit Dunjaba, Mainga Dodum, Mississauga, Anishinaabe Dowell. So I introduced myself in my language, told you my name, my indigenous name, what my clan is, and where I come from. I'd like to acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it. I'd like to acknowledge the many nations that walk this land in the past, the many nations that walk it today, and welcome you to the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe. So I want to say that I'm not an elder, I'm not a historian, I'm just a Gima, an elected chief, just a guy that the community members disliked a little less than the other guy. I'm going to talk about treaties really briefly and from my perspective, but if you want a historian or an elder to come back, or if you want me to come back, happy to do so. Just invite us and we'll make it happen. So I'm not going to solve any of your problems or answer any of your questions. As a matter of fact, by the time I'm done, I expect you'll have many more questions. But curiosity is the gateway of knowledge, so that's all good. So in my opening, you heard me mention the Creator, the world around us. You heard me acknowledge other nations, past and present, and you heard me end with an acknowledgement of the treaty. So first off, this is my way of paying respect to the Creator, to the world around us, to our mother, the earth, and to the many nations who have been here before and with us and are here today. So I ended with the treaty because the treaty is important. We use the treaties to remind people of the agreements and the obligations of the government and others to our nation. Without treaties, you wouldn't be here. Well, I suppose you could have tried to conquer us, but that's, given the complicated history we have and the strength of the indigenous people, that might have been a challenging road to go down. Under treaties, I have an obligation to everyone who lives and plays on our land. So when I talk about making things better for my people, I'm not just talking about only my people. I'm talking about everyone, to the best of my ability, to make arrangements and agreements that not only benefit my people, but other indigenous people and even non-indigenous people who live on this land. Treaties always recognize the right of the treaty holder to make a living on our lands, to sustain ourselves. Yet I cannot rely on hunting and fishing to make a way for our people, so I have to consider it in a modern context. And that means relying on partnerships, business opportunities, developments, economics to sustain our people in this modern world. But it does not end there. I must try and make things better for everyone. So the interpretation of treaties is always supposed to favor the indigenous. Yet the treaty is totally written in English, usually from the perspective of the Crown, and very little, if anything, is reflected of the indigenous people who are signing it. If you read a treaty agreement and it seems to you as if it's settled, I want you to know there's a lot of history to understand all perspectives. Treaties were developed for a purpose by the government, to claim the land. And they were, and still are in most cases, unfair, untruthful, unscrupulous, and sometimes just wrong. Treaties also talk of ownership of land, a concept alien to historical indigenous people on this land. So you can understand they were at a loss when it comes to negotiating treaties. But even today, when I talk of ownership of the land, I'm compromised, because I see our Mother the Earth as alive. Energy, spirit, and life exists in all things. So how do you own any of that? So is it any wonder First Nations were taken advantage of during treaty agreements when the world perspectives of the different nations were totally separate and totally so far apart? So I want to talk just briefly about an obligation that you have, in my opinion. So you have an obligation to learn, but more importantly, to understand the treaties from all perspectives. Now that could take time. Don't take anything just on the face of it. Do the research, have an elder come in, have a historian. If all else fails, you can call a chief. The chief will come in. You also should help us to ensure the government lives up to its obligations, because the honor of this government is also your honor. The agreements they signed made it possible for the lives you live today and the lives of your ancestors. So that's important that you become an ally to these treaties because you are a part of these treaties. Something else I deem as fundamental to treaties is an obligation to safeguard and protect the environment. It may not be stated outright in a treaty, but that's what they're all about, the land. So, 1, learn, understand, respect, and care for, and become an ally. Now, I want to end with a poem of what will happen if we don't come together and protect Mother Earth. It's simply entitled Mother. But this is not just about the environment. This also goes back to the treaties and the obligations that we all have under those treaties and as human beings for the protection of this earth for our generation and the future to come. Mother, why do you hurt me when I have nothing but love for you? I have seen you crawl from the dark into the light. I have watched you learn to walk and then to fly. I have seen you squabble and fight. I have cheered for you, and I have feared for you. I give freely of what is mine to give, yet you take more than I am able. You hurt me. More and more you ignore my pain and my cries. I am ancient, but I am not immortal. I have a time. Why do you seek to rob me of it? Through the years I have been here for you and yours, for your grandmothers and their grandmothers and their grandmothers. I would stay to see your children raise their children, but I cannot, for I am dying. I do not measure the passing of time as you do. Nevertheless, I know my time is coming, and it is soon. I love you, my children, but I fear I will fail you. And even though you have failed me first, anger is not in me, for I was created of love, as were you. Therefore, the toughest part of goodbye is knowing that you cannot go on without me, that your time will end far too soon, and no one will know. This great journey, this grand adventure called humanity, will be undone as if it never existed. I will care for you as long as I am able. Yet when the rivers no longer flow, when the trees die, when the wind rages and the storms come, know that it is not my anger, it is the end of the love I can no longer give, the love you can no longer take. It is my end, and sadly, it is yours. Be safe, be heard, Mama Pete.
Mississaugas of the Credit, Treaties. Prior to European contact, the ancestors of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation occupied the lands north of Lake Superior and the area around Georgian Bay. The Mississaugas lived lightly on the lands they occupied and purposefully moved about the landscape, harvesting resources as they became available. The ancestors of the Mississaugas of the Credit migrated into southern Ontario by means of military conquest. After the Iroquois had expelled the Huron from southern Ontario in 1649-1650, they continued their attacks northward into the territories occupied by the Mississaugas and their allies. By the end of the 17th century, the Mississaugas and their allies had succeeded in driving the Iroquois back into their homelands south of Lake Ontario. At the conclusion of the conflict, many Mississaugas settled at the eastern end of Lake Ontario. Other Mississaugas settled at the western end of the lake, with their primary location at the mouth of the Credit River. The Mississaugas of the Credit occupied, controlled, and exercised stewardship over approximately 3.9 million acres of lands, waters, and resources in southern Ontario. Their territory extended from the Rouge River Valley westward across to the headwaters of the Thames River, down to Long Point on Lake Erie, and then followed the shoreline of Lake Erie, the Niagara River, and Lake Ontario until arriving back at the Rouge River Valley. From the time of the conquest of New France in 1760, The British Crown recognized the inherent rights of First Nations and their ownership of the lands they occupied. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 confirmed First Nations sovereignty over their lands and prevented anyone other than the Crown from purchasing that land. The Crown, needing First Nations land for military purposes or for settlement, would first have to purchase it from its indigenous occupants.